Okay, we are now recording. I apologize. Rivka, what'd you say? Oh, okay. Okay. So we're getting going here, and we're going to be focusing on one very famous pasuk from the beginning of this week's Parshat. I unfortunately and foolishly didn't actually put the pasuk on the page, which was a mistake. Okay, I started with the Gemara on the pasuk, but let me read the pasuk, which probably most of you are aware of, and then we'll start to go through all of the Meforshim that I have on the pasuk. But let's begin. V'ye'etar Yitzchak laHashem. And Yitzchak, most people translate this as pleaded. We're going to see it's one of the 10 words in Chumash that means to pray, but most people here translate plead, v'ye'etar, but we're going to spend a lot of time seeing exactly what we mean by v'ye'etar. So Yitzchak pleaded Hashem L'nochach ishto. Now, again, most people believe that nochach means on behalf of. We're going to see another argument in just a few minutes. And so he's pleading with Hashem on behalf of his wife because ki akara he, because she is barren. She cannot have children. And that's like the bulk of the pasuk. And now the end of the pasuk, ve'ye'atar lo Hashem, and God received the plea. Please notice, and we're going to return to this at the end. Please notice that the word for Yitzchak davening is the same word that's used for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for God receiving the prayer. At the end, we're going to try to make that a very important point. I'm sorry? V'ye'etar lo Hashem, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu received the plea, v'taha Rivka ishto, and she became pregnant, and so she conceives at this point. So that's the pasuk, very, very famous pasuk, and there's a very famous Gemara that we have a copy of in English, and so it says Rabbi Yitzchak, coincidental, not it's not, that's his name, says, by the way, not only was Rivka akara, sterile, but Yitzchak too was akar. And that's to Chazal, a little bit of a chidush. Chazal assumed that if a couple couldn't have children, that the problem, I'm not sure what word to use, I don't want to use the word blame, but the issue was with the woman. That was the assumption of Chazal throughout the ages. More recently, I've read that in reality, it's very close to 50-50. Even though our sages assume that if you can't have kids, it's the woman who is akara. But the statistics, when I read different articles, I get different numbers, but generally I've seen it's about 55% of the time it's the woman, about 45% of the time it's the man, which basically means it's pretty close to 50-50. So, but anyways, the rabbis whose knowledge of medicine, wasn't perfect. And by the way, in terms of, fertility, there are all sorts of issues. There are psychological issues. I mean, things can change over time as well. But the assumption was that it was the woman, which is what the pasuk says. However, Chazal in the Gemara are telling us that, by the way, Yitzchak too couldn't bear children. But Yitzchak prayed to Hashem, Noach corresponding to is this translation. Noach meant like opposite his wife. It does not say for his wife, rather Noach, like corresponding. This teaches us that they were both sterile. So in other words, it's because of the language Noach. I'm sorry?
Hmm.
It's because the language Noach that Rabbi Yitzchak in the Gemara felt that it was both of them. So he had the problem, he's doing it on behalf of her. Okay. Question. If both prayed, why does it say Hashem hearkened? That's this translation. I would have said, accepted the plea, is what I have from Rabbi Kaplan, which is really my favorite translation of Chumash. Okay. How come Hashem hearkened to him? Just as an editorial point here, this is taken from a website, a Daf Yomi website. It's very nice, and I like them. I don't understand why you can't write out Hashem. I mean, it's like there's no kedusha to Hashem. I don't think there's kedusha to any names in English. But Hashem, we're saying Hashem so that we don't use the name of Hashem, and then they hyphenate that. I don't get it. But okay, that's a tirade for another time. Okay, Hashem hearkened to him, should say to them. Answer, the prayer of a tzaddik ben tzaddik is much greater than the prayer of a tzaddik whose father is evil. So here's the problem. Yitzchak is the son of Avraham Avinu. On the other hand, Rivka is the daughter of Bethuel, who wasn't such a nice guy. I mean, perhaps not as bad as his son Laban, but also wasn't a nice guy. So in other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, according to this Gemara, is more willing to hear the prayer of someone that has zchut avot, who has the ancestral merit. Now, I would like to add 2 points. Number one, I'm going to assume that this Gemara means that's when the prayer was equally well davened by each. In other words, if I'm sure that if you've got the son of a tzaddik who's on an off day and isn't davening so well, and you've got the offspring of a Rasha and is really motivated and davens with tremendous hitlahavut, with vibrant devotion, I can't believe that that it's automatic. I think that means that if all things being equal, that then there's a preference for the person that has zchut avot. And then you get into the whole issue of what's the zchut avot. I'm not sure. It could be Amish that there is something mystical in terms of the relationship and it gets passed down, or it could be something else. It could be educational, that someone who grows up in the house of a tzaddik learns how to daven better. I mean, that's why we say in Ashrei, we say, Dor l'dor Shabbat Masech. We learn to daven from generation to generation. If you witnessed, a parent who was a great davener, that we assume and hope that would mean that your davening is improved as a result. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said about that. We could have a whole shiur just on that, but I'm just bringing up that it's not as simple a statement as it sounds like. But okay. But then it says, Rabbi Yitzchak then makes the following point. 2 points, actually. The avot was sterile because Hashem desires the prayers of tzaddikim. We're going to talk more about that on the back side. We're going to see the parish of the Noam Elimelech, a Hasidic approach that's going to talk about why that's important. But in other words, that there is something in the davening, that there in some way that we may not quite understand. Look, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need anything from us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is totally self-independent as opposed to us, and doesn't need. However, there is something that perhaps HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants this for reasons that are not so clear. That somehow perhaps maybe it's better for the tzaddik. that it's an educational process for the tzaddik. In other words, when the Kadosh Baruch Hu tested Avram, not that a Kadosh Baruch Hu knew what was going to happen, nevertheless, he did it not because of anything else than it improved, strengthened Avram Avinu. And so maybe this is similar to that, but we'll see something else on the back. But now comes the first point that I really want to look into. The two terms I really want to talk about is nochach. We're going to talk about nochach, and we're going to talk about this root atar that we translated as daven or plead. Just like a pitchfork. Okay, the prayers of tzaddikim are compared to a pitchfork. Okay, so I thought it was cute to put a picture of a pitchfork. There's a guy, an Arab actually, who is using a pitchfork, just like the Gemara explains. Just like a pitchfork moves grain from one place to another. Okay. Also, prayers of tzaddikim switch, move the midot, the character traits of Hashem, from the midah of ka'as, of anger, to the midah of rachamim, of compassion. This translation is mercy. I personally like rachamim is compassion. It doesn't make any difference. In other words, that the prayers of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, kaviyachol, in some way, we don't understand, moves the dial. That Kadosh Baruch Hu right now is focused on anger, and the tzaddik davens, and now his pitchfork has moved the dial of a Kadosh Baruch Hu to rachamim, and now the tefillah can be heard. Now, the reason for this is very simple. The Hebrew word for a pitchfork is ayin tav resh, which is the root of the verb, v'ye'etah. So the rabbis didn't know what the word v'ye'etah. This is not a word that appears often in Tanakh. So what they were trying to figure out why this is the word for daven. And so actually, when you look in the midrash, which I have underneath the picture, it says that there are 10 words in Chumash for davening, and one of them is ve'etah. But this is the only place where it means it. So how do we know that? So you look in Onkelos. Onkelos is the authoritative translation of the Hebrew into Aramaic, and he says tzali. And tzali, we know, is the Aramaic word for tefillah, for davening. That's why if you listen carefully to the Kaddish Shalem, it says titgabel slotahon, except slotahon, our tzali, our prayer. However, when you look in Yonatan ben Uziel, who also translates to Aramaic, he doesn't say tzali. He says v'hafach Yitzchak. Yitzchak hafach, moved something, changed something. Because Yonatan ben Uziel, which is much more midrashic and less of a literal translation, feels that this idea of this is a prayer that moves a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's what he is emphasizing here, and that's what's going on in this Gemara. Okay. Very nice. Before we talk about V'ye'etah, I want to talk about Nochach. Now, Nochach, we just said, meant opposite, or on behalf of the wife, and so we said that he was davening for her, even though he had the same problem. It was Nochach, it was for her. So that's one interpretation. Another famous interpretation is Nochach meant they were both davening in different, Rashi brings this down, different corners of the room. But he's davening on behalf of her, she's davening on behalf of him, but it's his tefillah that ends up being listened to, is the Lashon V'ye'etah lo Hashem, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was persuaded, if I can use that word, Hashem responds to his davening. Okay. But what do we mean by nochach? Like I said, it could mean on behalf of, it could be opposite sides of the room. Right? But if you look on the back page, Rabbi Yaakov Mecklenburg, like the Malbim that we're going to see in a few minutes, is a wordsmith, and he's really into the etymology, and he wants to talk about mostly the word nocha, and he begins. Perishu kamo ba'avur. Its explanation for nochach is ba'avur. It's if it means on behalf of, for. Ve'ein lezeh dimyon b'mikra. But we don't have this anyplace else in Tanakh, that the word is used this way. This word doesn't appear anyplace else. This is it. The nearly, and I think, and when he says nearly, he's basically giving his own opinion. He doesn't necessarily have a source for this. Nearly, levi ha'mavua b'shorish. I'm going to explain to you the shorish, the root of this word. The koach she'ika harato hitchazkut v'hit amsut. So the word, the root of the word, he's going to say it more clearly in just a second, is koach, which means power, strength. Nochach means there was something powerful about his davening. Lechazek devarov lipnei shofet b'rayot. It's like talking in front of a judge, and you're very strong in giving across your proofs. Oh, hahitchaz. Okay. Oh, or perhaps hitchazhut lahatzdik atzmo lahafriya dat chavero. A love ke'inyan vikuach. Or perhaps it's somebody who's like debating. A vikuach, and if you look in the parentheses, this is one of those rare times that Rabbi Yaakov Mecklenburg put a word in parentheses, and I know what the word is, because usually the word he gives is either German or Yiddish. And this is, if you look at that word, disputation. A vikuach is a debate or a disputation, and that's what he wrote out. Disputation. Disputation. And so what happens is, it's like a guy who's like debating.
Quiet.
He's giving very strong, impassioned plea for his position, like a really good debater. And the essential, the word is the two letters koach. Okay. That here it means that he was really davening very strongly on behalf of his wife. That's what the word really means. And I want to go down to where it's bolded and underlined. He didn't care about this world. Yitzchak Avinu was very otherworldly. Was he always this way, or was it the result of the Akedah, the attempted sacrifice? We're not sure. But he definitely, as time goes on in his life, was very otherworldly. So he wasn't concerned with Olam Hazeh, with this worldly things. The Gamkan lo hirba litpalel rak lahapsarat ishto bilvad. He is davening with tremendous power, but it's not for him. He wanted it for his wife. That's what was important to him. And so we're going to get more on that idea in just a couple of minutes. But I want to go to the Noam Elimelech. Noam Elimelech, who was lived about a generation before the Rabbi Yaakov Mecklenburg, also in Central Europe, and he was one of the great students of the Maggid of Mezrich, and he was in that first generation of great Hasidic Rabbanim that went out into the field to spread Hasidus, and this is his sefer of his Torahs. Hine Yitzchak Avinu Olav Shalom, Hayat Kol Machshavato Kedoshim Kulu Lashem. Everything he thought was holy and was focused on a Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is a continuation of the idea we were saying a minute ago. He was very holy and very otherworldly. Dahainu l'shevach u'letehila l'Hashem yitbarach baruch hu. That all he was thinking about all the time was the greater glory of God. The Eitzel tzadikim gam tefillah shehem mitpalim nikra tehila. That when a tzaddik, a real righteous person, a truly pious person davens, that davening, not like our davening is quite often petition and asking for things, but their davening was just about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So for them, the word that described their davening is tehillah, praise. The lo hoya olam machshado lehitpalel al zera ba'olam. It wouldn't occur to him to daven for a son. It's like, no, that's I'm talking to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is between me and God, and it's all about spirituality and reminding myself how amazing God is. The idea of asking for something, that wasn't on his mind. Rak al megamato tfilato hayad laShem. Everything was focused elsewhere. To our Kadosh Baruch Hu, nothing, and I'm not asking for anything to come down, just that my prayer should be going up, up, up. V'zehu v'yeta Yitzchak Hashem l'nochach. That's what it means. And Yitzchak, I'm going to say pleaded with Hashem l'nochach on behalf of. Ratzaloma zeh hayah hitnagdut l'machshevet ishto. This was against his normal way of thinking for his wife. It was for the thinking of his wife. She knew that she needed kids for the world. She was thinking about the necessities of this world. That she was barren. She was the one who was thinking about this. The davening is because she was barren. Now we saw in the Gemara, and I was going to assume that the Noam Elimelech agreed that Yitzchak was also barren, but he didn't care. I mean, it wasn't on his mind, according to the Rabbi. It wasn't on his mind. V'yeta lo Hashem perish Hashem Yitbarach tahafoch et ritzon Yitzchak mikavanato harishona la kavana hanizka le'el. So what happened was, the pasuk says, and this is going to become important in about 15 minutes, that it says at the end of the pasuk, not only v'ye'atar was what Yitzchak did, but v'ye'atar was what Hashem did. So what happened was the word, according to the Rebbe, means to move, lahafoch, to move from position A to position B. So what happened was, Yitzchak is trying to move HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is moving Yitzchak. Where is he moving Yitzchak? He's moving Yitzchak away from not davening for a kid to davening for a kid. Why are the prayers of a tzaddik compared to a pitchfork? Just like a pitchfork moves stuff from point A to point B. So too their prayers do that. So he's saying that the word doesn't mean to plead or to pray or to beg. It means to move, to change, hafach, make a change, switch over. Hashem Yitbarach oseh ritzon lahatzadik, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making the will of the tzaddik. Zehu ritzon yorev yaseh. That's what we mean when we say ritzon yorev yaseh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does the ratzon of those who revere him. And this, of course, is in Ashrei. And that's a very important pasuk we're going to come back to in a few minutes. Ritzon yorev yaseh ve'et shavatam yishma v'yoshiyeh. Okay? So, but God does the will of those who revere HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He does will for those who fear him, those who revere him. And just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu changed the thinking of Yitzchak that he now really wanted a child, that's when it happened that she became impregnated. She conceived. Then he knew that she should be get pregnant. Before this, he didn't even think about it. It wasn't on his mind. Because he was totally davuk, clinging, attached to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. He was so otherworldly, it wasn't on his mind. So in other words, he davens on behalf of her, because it wasn't for him. For him, he didn't think about it. But what happens is, Kadosh Baruch Hu wants him to change also. So he's moving a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and as a result, this reciprocity, Kadosh Baruch Hu is moving him. And now he is into it, so to speak. And we see later, he wants to pass on the brachot. Now, he understood that having the children was necessary. That's how the Rebbe, the Noam Elimelech, Elimelech of Lezhinsk, deals with it. I want to go back to the front page, and I want to do the Malbim. The Malbim, who is a contemporary of Rav Yaakov Mecklenburg, they were active in the middle of the 19th century, and again in Central Europe, and he is again, like Rav Yaakov Mecklenburg, very much into the language issues, not into mysticism like Noam Elimelech, not into spirituality, although they were very spiritual men, but their interpretations are based on the words. V'ye'etam. Okay. Haleida b'vnei adam sheyolid midno shetole b'teva kumo sheshapul b'teva hatzomeach v'achai lashir mino. Okay, so with people, just like with nature and animals and plants, you give birth for the purpose of continuing the species. Now, the Malbim clearly, we know from other places too, he knew about Darwin. There's this idea about there being, this idea of species and maintaining the species. This was something he was aware of. He was very much aware of what was going on in the world. He was very, very much aware of science and current events. Not necessarily true as much of some of the Hasidic contemporaries of his, but in the mid-19th century, he was very much aware of what was going on in the world. So he's saying that there's a biological aspect to having children. Ulam sheyolid sgula sheyotze pri nivcha kodesh hilulim hu neged hateva. However, having a holy child, now it's having a child that has your DNA. He didn't know about DNA, but having a child that carries on your traits and is your offspring to carry on the family and the name, that's normal. But to have a child who is very holy and is something very special, that's against the natural order of things. To get that kind of special offspring who is going to become one of the patriarchs of the Jewish nation, that requires something very, very special. And the very special thing that it requires is intervention on the part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, this idea is important, and it's true. In other words, Avram's got a number of kids. He not only has, Yitzchak, he's got Ishmael, and then he marries Keturah, whether she's Hagar or somebody else. I don't care. And he has more kids. So he's got kids, but only one of them is Yitzchak. Only one of them is the patriarch. And the same is going to happen with Yitzchak. He's going to have two kids. Only one of them is Yaakov. The other one's Esav and is an Eisvor who goes off. So in other words, for the child to be special, holy, unique, that requires divine intervention. That's why the matriarchs were barren. In other words, I know the Gemara, we read the Gemara half an hour ago. We read the Gemara that said that, the matriarchs were barren so that they would daven. But it's not enough that they daven to have children. They daven to have special children. So the fact that they had to daven is something very, very special. It's not just for the DNA. It's not just for the ear. It's for the patriarch. It's for the fact that that child is going to be one of the founders of Am Hashem. Pre-Kodesh ein teva muchenet me'atzma ad yofia koach eloki. So for this kind of special birth to take place, that he uses the expression, it's almost a mystical expression, klipa, to come out of the shell, to come out of the hidden state of holiness in this world and become manifest in the world, that requires divine intervention. And that you have to daven for. That's ad yofia koach eloki, until there appears divine power. We would usually say divine intervention. Okay. Shezeh yitorer al yedei hatfilah. This kind of special divine intervention in our world is a result of tefillah. Does that mean it's only a result of tefillah? I'm not sure. I assume that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things sometimes unbidden, per se. But for this kind of special child to be born, who is going to be Mesugal, who's going to be destined for this kind of contribution to the world, that requires Koach Eloki. And to get that Koach Eloki, it only comes through Tefillah. So he's giving his pshat based on the words, but he's also explaining the Gemara. He's making sense out of what the Gemara was saying. Why were they barren? Oh, they weren't barren just to have kids. They were barren so that the kids would be special. And that requires davening. Yitoreh yedei tefillah la'atzil neshama kedosha bat Elokim asher ta'as chaya. That's awakened through prayer to give it la'atzil, to strengthen it with a holy soul that comes directly. The soul is a daughter of God. The soul comes more directly or more connected to Hashem than regular souls, Asher Tas Chayil, which is going to do special things. This Aseh Chayil, of course, was used at the end of the book of Ruth to talk about her offspring. We're going to do Aseh Chayil, going to do special things, which of course results in David HaMelech. והגם שיצחק כבר היה מוכן לזה מעת העקדה, כמו שכתוב שם. And I want to tell you that Yitzchak was ready for this. It wasn't that Yitzchak wasn't interested. Yitzchak was interested in having an heir and in being part of this. This goes against some of the things we were saying before, that especially the more Hasidic, Kabbalistic of the commentaries feel that Yitzchak was totally out of it. And the Malbim says no, that for Yitzchak, the message of surviving the Akedah was he has to father the Jewish nation. He is required to be part of this Masorah, part of this chain of tradition. He is responsible for making sure that the Abrahamic revolution continues. So he was into it. It's not that like Noam Elimelech said, he was just totally spiritual and didn't even know. Rivka lo hayata muchenet lezeh. Rivka, on the other hand, she didn't have this. She wanted to have kids, like everybody wants to have kids. She was more on the nature side of it. She wasn't as yet, apparently, as aware of her fate, of her destiny, as Yitzchak was. She was barren, but for her, barren was more a physical state and less of a spiritual state. And now we're telling the story of how she becomes prepared for this special birthing situation. Aleph, here both with tefillah. Number one, she becomes more into this, and this whole system comes to fruition through the fact that there is a tremendous increase in the davening. She's davening, he's davening. There's a lot of davening going on. So that's a catalyst for special things to happen. Because of this, v'ye'atar. And so he is saying the word v'ye'atar does not mean lahapoch, to move, to change. That's not his pshat. He says, by the way, this is not only his pshat, the Rashbam says it, the Sforno says it, many of the other Pashtanim, the etar is shamora al hariboy. The term indicates increase. The ye'atar, the best translation is he davened a lot. That there was an effort to making sure that there's a lot of prayer going on for this outcome. So that's first thing. The ye'atar does not mean that you changed Hashem. It means that they are davening a lot because they're becoming, and especially Rivka, becoming aware of how important the child is. Bet. So she's davening and finding out how important their child is going to be. However, what's Yitzchak davening for? Wait a minute, what's he davening for? He knows he's going to have a child. He is totally unconcerned with whether or not they'll have a child because he knows he's been promised a child. It's clear from the Brit to Avram and to the assurances that he gets by surviving the Akedah. He knows he's destined to have a son, an heir. But he was concerned that he might have to do what his father did and have other wives to have more children, or to have children bichlal. And of course, he ends up being the only one of the avot who doesn't have multiple wives. He's the only one who is totally monogamous, and he really wants to have his child with Rivka. And of course, this idea that he really wants to have his child from Rivka, I apologize, it's my son. I'm just going to tell him. Yishai, hi, I'm giving you a share. Can I call you in about half an hour? Okay, bye. I apologize. My son's having a stressful week, so I have to. There's a lot going on. Okay. So he wants to make sure that the son that he knows he's going to have, the heir that's going to be the next patriarch, he wants to make sure that that is going to come through Rivka Dafka, because of what we said last week. he fell in love with Rivka. That was last week's share was all about his love affair with Rivka, and that's point number 2. That's what he's davening for. Gimel, l'nochach ishto. Okay, so he's davening opposite his wife, on behalf of his wife. Let's see what he says. Sha'al yedei sha'mikabel omeid nochach hamashpia. Okay. He's davening opposite his wife because that when you are trying to transmit something to someone else, the receiver should be standing opposite the one who is transmitting. The mekabel is the receiver, the mashbia is the transmitter, is the one who transfers something. So the whole concept of I am trying to move something towards the other party means that they should be opposite me. That's what he feels is going on here. That he's davening nochach because he's being inspired and he wants to have her there when he's davening because he's transferring whatever it is to her. Yuhan yotir lekabel hashpa'ah. Under that circumstance, the receiver is more prepared to receive from the transmitter. Valkach v'ata lo. And that's what it means. And this increase in davening, okay, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is providing that increase on his behalf, and it is going towards her just like he wanted. And then he ends up with V'chazal Amru, she'enu domet tfilat tzadik ben tzadik, etc. And then he agrees with the Gemara and to explain what the Gemara means. The Gemara means that he who was part of the Masorah understood this point. It's not necessarily always true, but in this case, it makes a lot of sense that he understood what was on the line. And what's on the line in this entire enterprise, of course, is the transmission of the Jewish people to their child. And so he has to get her involved in this. And that's why his davening is going to be better, because he's in a better position to understand what the stakes were in this particular enterprise. And so he is mamish into it. There's a Kedushas Levi at the bottom of the page that I just want to quickly say what Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, he's actually the earliest of all of these commentaries. He's a slightly, sort of a contemporary of the Noam Elimelech, but slightly earlier. So he says that the change had to do with the male and female aspects of the two people davening, and that the ye'atar, it's got to be changed. That when you're not able to give birth to children, when you're akara or you are barren, it's because that you are right now like on the same wavelength, and you've got to be on different wavelengths because there's got to be feminine and masculine. And when there's akara, they're not really on the separate sides. If you need like positive, negative, you need like different aspects to come together to make the child. So that's what the Kedushas Levi. It's like a little bit of a different approach. But the reason I don't want to go into is because I'm running out of time, and I want to make another point that I think is very important. On this pasuk, Rav Kook, and I only saw this after I made the sheet, and otherwise I would have put it on the sheet. Rav Kook wrote, when a person prays, one's faculty of desire expands. When you're davening, you become more aware of the things that you want. And therefore, your whole concept of desire just becomes greater. What most expands, his faculty of desire is directing one's thoughts in the fulfillment of his desire to Hashem. It becomes more real. You start saying, "Oh, I want, my son to be a Talmid Chacham." But then when you start davening for it, it becomes, wow, this is something I really want. It becomes a bigger deal because you're now expressing it. And a person is saying the specifics to Hashem. When a person starts a join to Hashem, and his desire is then joined to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with an inner mental connection, I'm much more cognitively aware of this, then all his spiritual faculties expand beyond all gvulot, all limits. And his good and lofty desire, when most expanded, executes its goodness. And he believes that the more I want to do good, the more good I'm going to do, the more good that's going to result from everything that I do. Prayer as an act, like any tangible act, likewise gets expanded the more I concentrate on it. Everything, however, depends upon the degree of holiness found in the supplicant's personal desire and in the divine content that fills his soul. What does he mean? What I think that Rav Kook means is, and I think this is the real pshat in the pasuk, when it says, V'yata Yitzchak Lashem, Yitzchak is, I'm going to say, connecting to Hashem on behalf of his wife because she's barren. V'yata lo Hashem, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes connected to him. The reason that the same verb is used for the prayer and the response or reaction to the prayer is because what makes prayer work is when we work on being on the same wavelength with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And now let me go back to that pasuk in Ashrei. Ritzon Yereyav Ya'aseh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does the will of those who revere Hashem. The Et Shavatam, and their prayer, Shav'ah, their supplication, Yishma, V'Yoshiein. Shavatam and Yoshiein have the exact same root, Shin, Ayin, Hey. That when Hashem does the ratzon of those that fear, revere, respect HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that what happens is Shabbatam Yoshiein. They get answered because they've gotten onto the same wavelength with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want you to know, in my little siddur that I use in the morning, I actually wrote next to that pasuk, I wrote harmonic resonance. That when I'm davening, what am I trying to do? What am I really trying to accomplish? I really don't think what we're trying to accomplish when we daven is to get specific things. I know we have, like a wish list in our Shmona Esrei of originally 12, now 13 items that we would like to get ticked off, right? Yes, I did. I want to confess. Good. I want to get cured, and I want Mashiach. I want bad guys to be destroyed. Okay. It's like even though it looks like a checklist, what we're really doing when we daven is trying to get on the same wavelength of Hashem. Those things that we're asking for are things that we believe, Chazal have informed us, that Hashem wants to be true of the world. Hashem wants there to be intelligence, tshuva, health, security, judges, Mashiach, Yerushalayim rebuilt. So in other words, those are the things that we believe, and Chazal are teaching us, are the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu want to be true of the world in which we live. So when we daven, it's not this Hashem is up there with all of these goodies, and we're asking for some of them to be thrown our way. That's not what it's about. It's not this, cosmic game of go fish, and trying to get what I want. And if people do that, it's okay. I think that's a shlav. I think that's a stage in getting to what Rav Kook is talking about, and what I think is pshat in our pasuk, and what that verse that David HaMelech wrote in Ashrei is about, which is we're trying to talk to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, to communicate with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, to meditate with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, for the purpose of finding out what it is that a Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to want. And those are the things that ultimately are going to happen. Maybe not even in our lifetimes, but those are the things that we're moving toward in this cosmic march. And that's what was happening in our pasuk. Yitzchak didn't yet know exactly what he wanted. Was it that he didn't want a child yet, or was he not thinking about it and he had to be pushed into according to the Hasidic approach, or was it that he was still working out how this was going to happen? But he was trying to get this idea, this concept accomplished. That concept accomplished was the continuation of God's plan for him. So he is trying to get into that mode. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to get him into that mode. And at some point, it all gels. And the result is Rivka becomes impregnated and conceives Yaakov and Esau. And in other words, yes, prayer works, but it doesn't work in the way you think it works. When you pray, something is supposed to change. And the thing that's supposed to change is you. That prayer is ultimately working on me. And that's why the verb to pray is reflexive. Lehit palel. Reflexive means it's working on me. And hopefully, when we daven well, the sad thing is, we daven so much, and quite often we don't daven that well. And I'm embarrassed to say it, but there are mornings when I can't remember if I said something in the davening. It's like, we put ourselves on autopilot, and davening in the morning is sometimes, like one of those things you have to, okay, brush my teeth, okay, wash my hands, and daven, okay? But that's not what it's about. It's about trying to really understand my place in the big picture, the cosmos. It's trying to put into perspective my relationship with Hashem, and trying to figure out, not so much what I want from Hashem, but hopefully to figure out what Hashem wants from me. And that's what's going on in our pasuk. That's why it's so important that these powerful verses about prayer, the same word is used for the prayer as for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response. And hopefully that happens to us. I know it doesn't happen all the time, but hopefully when you finish davening, at least sometimes you come away thinking, this is something that moved me. This is something I have to think about. This is something that's changing me. And that's what I think ultimately our pasuk is about. Yitzchak, we don't know that much about Yitzchak, but not nearly as much as we know about Avram, and much less than Yaakov. Yaakov, we really know a lot. His story is filled out the most. But Yitzchak is growing, and Yitzchak grows at the Akedah. Yitzchak grows in this experience, and Yitzchak grows in his experience with Yaakov and Esau. And this is a very big step in the growth of Yitzchak. And the growth of Yitzchak at this moment, he finally really gets on the same page with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in terms of being the patriarch, in terms of being the ma'avar, being the transmitter of the Abrahamic revolution. Okay, what I'm going to try, if anybody, okay, so we're starting to run out of time, but if anyone wants to, wants to ask a question, I wanted to on purpose leave a couple of minutes for that.
Do you see that the role of this ma'avar switches to Rivka, because ultimately she is the one that distinguishes between her two sons and recognizes which one really has to assume that role?
Excellent. Up until this point, I'm glad you said that. Up until this moment, I believe that he loved Rivka because Rivka replaced in his life Sarah. I think at this moment, he is transferring something to Rivka that she becomes a real partner in the situation. And yes, that eventually means that she guides that that story at the end of the Parshat. That she becomes that when he prays on behalf of her, something really did affect her as well. I know we're saying that he's the one who really gets answered, because Tzaddik ben Tzaddik, but she, more than he, is tremendous recipients of this. And yes, she grows greatly out of this experience and the pregnancy and then the birthing. Yes, I like that comment very much. Thank you. And anything else? I see we're getting close to 8:30, but I don't mind staying another minute or two if there are. The truth is, I like that comment. Maybe I should have spent more time trying to talk about Rivka, because the Malbim, hints at it that there is something happening, to her. As well as, I'm sorry? Okay. So I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to wish everyone a wonderful week, and
Chodesh Tov. Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov, right. Tonight is Rosh Chodesh. I did say Yalla V'Yavo, and that I did remember. And yeah, Chodesh Tov. Everyone should have a wonderful month. Kislev, get some joy. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi, very much.
Thank you very much.
A pleasure. Good evening.
Thank you.